All right, this is part 3 of chapter 1 of Cambridge Ancient History. Setting the stage, that's volume 1 of Cambridge Ancient History. This will not be a typical audio book where we just read through everything. I teach English, so the idea here is to do two things. One is, because the language is very complicated sometimes, is to try and summarize and try to put into simpler language each paragraph and talk about complicated words we don't understand, or try to say things in simpler terms. So this video could be for a couple of different types of people who want to improve their English by learning something, but also people who enjoy history and want to think about the words more carefully. So if English is your native language, this could be interesting because we're not just glossing over all of the words together, but kind of trying to think about it. So it's taking a long time. I've only read chapter 1. I'm not even finished. Hopefully this will be the last video on chapter 1. But altogether, one chapter is 9 hours because we're stopping and we're talking about everything, looking up words, finding pictures of things. So it's really an in-depth reading. It's not just a straight reading of Cambridge Ancient History Volume 1. So let's start reading approximately where we left off last time in chapter 1. Let's see. Before turning, however... Oh, wait. I'm already making mistakes here. Before turning, however, to the Paleolithic series in Europe, the questions confront us. What was happening east of the Nile Valley and south of that section of the folded highland, which affronts so abruptly the Levant and the Persian Gulf? So they're talking about the Middle East, what was going on there. Namely on that large Arabian flatland, which lies dislocated and tilted askew between Greater Africa and Greater Asia, and along the Palestinian Isthmus, which connects the North Angle to the Highland Zone. In the earlier stages, as we've seen, this flatland was itself a part of Africa, and the great fractures which determined the geography of the Red Sea and the Nile Valley did not wholly break this connection. Both at the northern and southern end of the Red Sea, there had been frequently continuous land, and in dry periods this sea shrank through evaporation. And the Dead Sea has shrunk now. But the great slab of Arabia itself, tilting steadily under Iranian fold stresses, became structurally secluded behind its abrupt western escarpment and offered its occupants an independent, if rather restricted, career until the comparatively late disruption of the Hormuz Strait. The waters of the long Mesopotamian lake and Adriatic of the Near East restricted the land area of this peninsula and mitigated its climate. The dimensions of this eastward flowing drainage system testify to former fertility, and we must probably conceive that it was having long enjoyed a regime not unlike that of peninsular India, with Lebanon and Bashan playing the part of the Ghats. So they're comparing the Middle East to India, saying that probably the weather and things like that were very similar. They had very similar conditions at the time. That it was inhabited by man with a Paleolithic culture resembling that of North Africa is proved by implements from Sinai, Palestine, and Phoenicia. So by implements, they mean tools or things like that humans left. The only districts which have been sufficiently explored, they range from Mousterian types onwards, that is to say, from at least the third pluvial maximum, of the sequence of physical types, we know nothing provisionally. It may be assumed from the sequence of artifacts that if Neanderthal man ranged over this region, as is suggested by the Mousterian implements he has extirpated, as in the West. They keep using that word Mousterian, and I think that last time I was too lazy to look that up. So I just want to see what that means. Mousterian. I'm asking ChatGPT. But even when I type, let me see if I spelled that correctly. Mousterian. Yeah, I'm spelling it correctly, but even when I type it, it says it's not a word. Oh, let's see. Mousterian is an archaeological term that refers to a Middle Paleolithic stone tool industry associated with Neanderthals. This period is named after the site of Le Moustier, a rock shelter in the Dordogne region of southwestern France, where these distinctive tools were first identified. The Mousterian period is estimated to have occurred approximately 160,000 to 40,000 years ago, characterized by a specific set of stone tools. The Mousterian is often associated with Neanderthal populations in Europe and parts of Asia and the Middle East. The tools associated with the Mousterian industry include various types of bifacial hand axes, scrapers, and points. These tools were likely used for hunting, butchering animals, and various other tasks. Okay, so it's a period named after a region in France, and that period was between 160,000 and 40,000 years ago. All right. Eurafrican stock for the actual inhabitants, though, far from uniform, are in essential akin to their Western neighbors. It would be natural to expect some traces of the Grimaldi Negroids of the Riviera caves and of the poor white strains already mentioned. I think I already read this last time. Oh well, we're reading it again. Because I wonder what they mean by poor white. What is that supposed to mean? That must be some 19th century terminology. I'm not sure what it describes. Which are common to the Atlantic seaboard, the Mediterranean, and peninsular India, and superficial observation supports this, but there has been no accurate survey as yet. All that can be stated at present is that a modern population of generically Eurafrican stock shows larger local modifications than the present uniform regime would lead us to expect. Yeah, I remember reading this last time. So I think I'm starting like 2 pages before we finished last time. And so here they're saying that this area, this Eurafrican population, probably had more variation than you see in these regions now. At least that's the way I'm interpreting it. Of generically Eurafrican stock show larger modifications than the present uniform regime would lead us to expect, and it may be inferred from this that with more copious vegetation, the main drainage areas were formerly better secluded and permitted such differentiation. And they may be actually talking about plants and animals as well. The most important of these local varieties is a comparatively broad-headed type with extreme type in the extreme south of Arabia. No, I think they're just talking about people. But there is no evidence as to its antiquity here, and it may only result from intercourse in historic times with trading centers in North Syria, which, as we have seen, is in an ancient dependency of the Highland Zone. So there may be saying that these differences occurred because of interaction with other populations. Wait a minute. I want to recenter this. Okay. Let's keep going. Such are the physical circumstances in which was fashioned one of the most notable of human stocks, the Semites of Arabia. Physically, they are akin to their Hamitic neighbors beyond the Red Sea and throughout Eurafrica, and strongly contrast with the men of the highland zone, who have spread southward along its Syrian projection or overflowed from time to time along the margins of the tilted slab. Culturally, they have been habituated for long ages. Well, so they're talking about Semitic people, and that normally, I think, in modern times just refers to Jews and Arabs. And so they're kind of explaining the origins, or what they believe to be the origins of the characteristics of these people in the Middle East, or the place that we know as the Middle East now. Culturally, they have been habituated for long ages, like the Nile Plateau folk. So they're making a distinction between, it seems, the people in Egypt and the people who occupy the Arabian Peninsula and that area. To alternations of moisture and drought, which, however, never seem to have permitted any extensive growth of forest except on the monsoon frontage to the southeast. And by the way, if you're watching this and you want to correct me if I'm misunderstanding something or you think I'm getting it wrong, just leave a comment. I would be happy to be set straight if I'm not sure what I'm talking about here. I'm just reading along with you. They are therefore, they are therefore typically grassland folk. They have domestic animals of their own, goat, camel, and ass. All native to Arabia, the sheep and eventually the horse have been acquired by them from outside, in both cases from the north. They have a remarkable type of linguistic structure, remotely shared only by the Hamitic group, which lies nearest to them otherwise, and a temperament and outlook more coherent and persistent than that of any other of the greater races. In the moister spells, such people multiply over the widening grassland more rapidly than any alien can habituate himself to pastoral life. So when there's ample water, when there's enough water, they tend to multiply, more people. They have more babies over the widening grassland to take advantage of the grassland that the rain creates. So they're very adapted to this harsh environment, this difficult environment, or to precarious agriculture between the desert and the sown. On the other hand, in spells of drought, Arabia erupts like a volcano, pouring floods of highly organized and mobile tribes across its land frontiers, northward, and across the Jordan River and across the Jordan Rift into the coastland, Syria and Palestine, perchance even to Africa. And so when there isn't enough water, they have no problem spreading out into other parts of the nearby lands of possibly even as far as Africa. There has been percolation also more insidious, but of wide effect across the Red Sea, and especially its southern strait, where the transit into Africa is shorter and timber for boats is more available. And this word timber, if you don't know, because I'm just sort of assuming you're not a native English speaker, maybe you are, but timber always refers to wood. So it was easier to find wood outside of the Arabian Peninsula, it seems, is what they're saying. In Africa, actually. Such periodic exodus of Arabian tribes can be traced back inferentially to the 3rd millennium, at least. So that would be maybe, I guess, 5,000 years ago. And it need not be supposed that the earliest recorded movement was by any means the first. The pre-dynastic regime of Upper Egypt, for instance, seems to be partly due to such a movement crossing the Red Sea to Kosair and reaching the Nile at Koptos by a trail which can be followed now. So even now you can see the trail of their migration. And has already been hinted that the old population of the Nile Valley may have been supplemented even earlier. I just have to recenter this. The physical resemblance between Arabian and Eurafrican man is, however, close enough to make detection difficult. Even if early evidence were found. Allusion has already been made to the prolongation southwards of spurs from the highland zone through North Syria to form, with the high western edge of Arabia and continuous highland causeway along the abrupt eastern margin of the Mediterranean and then along the Gulf of Aqaba to loftier and steeper escarpments fronting the Red Sea. In structure, most of this causeway is Arabian, but its exposure to wet winds and the west has given it a Mediterranean climate and a considerable rainfall. It is the good land beyond Jordan, flowing with milk and honey. So, in case you don't know, that was always the reference, the phrase to reference Israel. So they must be talking about Israel here, which tempts the nomads of Arabia in all ages, yet has never acclimatized them to itself. So the Arabians have always been interested in this land, but have never, I guess, been able to conquer it in one way or another. I think that's what they're saying. For the vegetation is partly old African with tropical survivals, still in the hot, moist jungle of the Jordan Gorge, partly Mediterranean, spreading along the coast plains and seaward foothills, but always mainly Asiatic, reinforced ever since the junction of highland causeways above mentioned. From the highland zone, as its north end, of its earlier human occupants, we have little but a few Mousterian implements. But in the first Neolithic culture in Palestine, the people are of the highland breed. They burn their dead, and their implements, pottery, and other equipment are in strong contrast both with everything Egyptian and with the grassland influences which predominate later. So they're saying that the people of Palestine are clearly culturally different from the Egyptians based on the tools and pottery that they found. And also different from, what did they call it? The grassland influences which predominate later. So the grassland I think they're referring to, if it's the same, is probably Arabia. So it seems like they're separating three different cultures. There's the Egyptian culture, and then the Palestinian culture, and then the Arabian culture. And they all seem to have some distinctions. But the moist air seems to be fatal to him, and many of the peasantry of South Palestine are hardly to be distinguished from their Neolithic predecessors. So they're saying that maybe Arabians feel comfortable in the more humid areas of Palestine, and so they don't like to go there. And because of this, I guess Palestinians haven't changed very much since early times. Well, according to what they're implying here, it seems like. But the Palestinian complication is not the only one which qualifies the homogeneity of Arabia. Very ancient interaction of the streams which furrow the south face of the highland zone has reduced its drainage systems in this region to three. The Cilician rivers, I hope I'm saying that right, I have no idea, trending southwestward, have created a secluded alluvial foreshore of the Gulf of Alexandretta. People in all ages by tribes who have come down from the mountain region inland, or more rarely have landed from oversea, The Tigris, flowing southeastward, is joined below Mosul by the two Zab rivers from the Median highlands in what has once in what was once another such foreshore as the head of the Mesopotamian Gulf. But it could only attain its eventual importance when that foreshore spread along the foothills of Zagros and merged with the similar deltas of Diyala and eventually of Kerka and Karun further south again. The latter even now has a separate mouth west of Shat el Arab. Here again, as in Palestine and Cilicia, vegetation and other occupants spread outwards from the valleys and coastwise as the delta foreshores encroached on the Gulf. But between the headwaters of the Tigris and those of the Cilician, where is that? I've never heard of the Cilicia River before. Let's see where that is. I wonder if it still exists. Cilicia River. I just found something in Wikipedia here. Let's see. So this looks like it's in southern Turkey, southeastern Turkey. Well, this is Cilicia anyway. Oh, well, this is the name as part of the Roman Empire, so I don't even know. It's probably not called that anymore. But it was a region in the Roman Empire. So I guess the the major rivers in Cilicia are Seyhan and Cihan Berdan. Okay, these are just a lot of Turkish words. So, well, it's somewhere in Turkey, southeastern Turkey. But between the headwaters of the Tigris and those of the Cilician rivers, one southward stream, Euphrates, has cut back deeper and further than its neighbors, and intercepted not only the original headwaters of the Tigris between Malatia and Diyarbakir, I don't know how to say that, but far larger areas of the old westward drainage as far as Erzurum and the slopes of Mount Ararat. Thus reinforced, Euphrates has excavated in successive periods of elevation and copious rainfall a wide and deep valley well watered and fertile throughout. Athwart the sunk northeastern slope of the Arabian slab, reaching the Gulf formerly at El Der and later Anna, and at the beginning of the modern phase at Hit, where it descends a last terrace of solid coastline almost to the present sea level, to plants, animals, people of the foothills and the Syrian parkland. This long, fertile valley was always offered sustenance far out into the steppe and desert which it traverses. So this river gives life to a lot of people in a lot of areas where it's difficult to grow food. So it made life possible in a lot of different places. By this emphatic frontier of the Euphrates Channel, a roughly triangular area of southward sloping plateau, a miniature Arabia about as large as Ireland is marked off from Syrian and North Arabian plateau, and has never wholly been rejoined in history. This is Mesopotamia, the land between rivers. For the Tigris, now I know that word, Mesopotamia, but let's just look and see on a map exactly where it is. Mesopotamia. Might as well, right? Since we're reading about it. I mean, that's pretty much where I figured it was, but it doesn't hurt to just take a little look. There's Mesopotamia. This is Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, for the Tigris delimits it no less clearly eastward from the foothill country between Zagros ranges. Its structure is continuous with that of Syria. Its climate is essentially the same, giving it at present desert and steppe regime in the south, and parkland nearer the hills. Its only river, the Kabur, rises in the highland where it threatens to behead what is left of the upper Tigris at Diyarbakir. But till this happens, its drainage area is not sufficient to give it geographical importance, except that where it falls into the Euphrates, close below El Der, its delta forms a cultivable plain opening on the main valley. It will be seen at once that, like Syria to the westward, Mesopotamia forms a region of transition, occupiable from the highland north of it as far as its parkland extends at any given period, but offering wide steppe pasture to any nomads of Arabia who may succeed in putting their flocks across the Euphrates. These then were the geographical and economic factors down to the time when the present sea level was established and the Euphrates delta propagated southeastward from Hit began to coalesce with those of the Tigris and the Diyala round the Mesopotamian Gulf head, which then lay between Baghdad and Samarra. We might compare an immature Lombardy with the Ticino preparing to join deltas with the Po. So they're comparing these two rivers in Italy and what they might look like. What has followed, while the joint delta pushed its alluvial steppe and dense fen margins seaward over the 550 miles which separate Hit from the modern coastline, is disputed and must inevitably be obscure. So wait, let me read that again. What has followed while the joint delta pushed its alluvial steppe and dense fen margins seaward over 550 miles, which separate Hit from the modern coastline? So the coastline has shrunk? I think it's either shrunk or grown. Wait, let's see. What has followed while the joint delta pushed its alluvial steppe and dense fen margins seaward over? So I think it was a bigger river or a bigger body of water, and somehow the land erupted or took over the water, and they're not sure why. So the modern, where the water is now, is different from where it was before. I think it shrunk. I think it got smaller, but they're not sure why. As in Egypt, the population, human and other, of the alluvial floodplain may be presumed to have been derived from the shores of the Gulf as it silted up. But these shores, as we've seen, were themselves peopled from different sources. The delta of the eastern torrents from the Zagros foothills, the Tigris banks, with sparse but continuous offshoots of the occupants of its upper valley, the fertile bed of the Euphrates, with similar elements, longer segregated, however, from their highland and parkland ancestry. Arabia, on the other hand, established a longer and longer land frontier with the growing floodplain, as happened to Libya, while the Nile trough was being silted up. It overflowed this frontier with its own aborigines wherever steppe conditions were established. So it seems like people came to this area from many different places and then mixed. That seems to be what they're saying here. This Arabian element became more important as two conditions were fulfilled. First, as the northern part of the delta between the main rivers and behind its advancing fen frontage on the Gulf Head was assimilated in climate and vegetation to the steppe of the southern Mesopotamia. Oh, let me read that again. The Arabian element became more important as two conditions were fulfilled. So two things happened that made the Arabian influence more important. First, the northern part of the delta between the two main rivers and behind its advantage. What does fen mean? I think last time that word sounds familiar. Like maybe last time I looked that up. Let's see, fen frontage. What does it say? Part of. Well, it just says fen. What if we say fen meaning? Okay, yeah, a fen is like a marsh. So if you're not sure, I think we looked this up last time. It does sound familiar. And then I think I even remember looking at this very picture. So it's like wet land. That's a fen. So the Arabian influence became more important because number one, the advancing fen frontage, which means it was growing, getting bigger, on the Gulf Head, was assimilated in climate and vegetation to the steppe of southern Mesopotamia. So they became less distinct, I guess is the way I would interpret that. And let's see. Second, as the main Euphrates stream took a more easterly course, so as the Euphrates started to turn more towards the east, as it eventually did, leaving a larger expanse of alluvium from Kerbela southward, undefended by any considerable water channel against Arabian immigrants. So because the Euphrates moved eastward, it was more possible for the Arabian people to also move eastward because the water formed a natural protection for the people who lived on the other side. This too nearly opposite the point where intercourse is easiest with the comparatively hospitable Nejd oasis in the heart of the peninsula. On the other hand, the establishment of an important bifurcation of the Euphrates through a new channel across the Tigris near Baghdad. On the other hand, the establish of a new important bifurcation. So I guess the river divided into two near Baghdad. Let's see. Euphrates. I mean, I'm pretty good with geography, but Tigris. I'm not sure what they're describing here. Let's see. Oh, wait. If we can find on a map. So let's see if we can find Baghdad here. See what they're talking about. Although maybe it's very different now because they're talking about ancient geography or geology. Let's see. Well, they don't really say the names here. Maybe this is better. Okay, so there is a place where the Tigris and the Euphrates come together. Is that near Baghdad? Let's see. Where's Baghdad? Well, Baghdad is... No. Well, let's look up the meaning of bifurcation. I thought it meant like dividing into two, but maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. Division of something into two branches or parts. Okay. So yeah, they're saying the body of water divided into two parts somewhere near Baghdad. That's how I would interpret that. And interposed a fresh obstacle to nomad intruders from Mesopotamia into what may henceforward be called by its historic name of Babylonia, or by the older names of Sumer and Akkad, its principal subregions, which differ slightly in accordance with their respective situations, that under these circumstances the southern or Sumerian half of the growing delta should be more exclusively populated from the foothills of Zagros. They keep mentioning this place, Zagros, but I don't know. You know, I keep trying to ignore some of these things I don't know, but then they keep. Let's see, map. They keep mentioning it. I suppose it's a good thing, since I should, if I'm reading this, I should probably know what they're talking about. So Zagros, I guess these are the Zagros Mountains. They're here. This looks like Iran, a little bit in Turkey, something like that. Okay. Under these circumstances, the southern or Sumerian half of the growing delta should be more exclusively populated from the foothills of Zagros, and that the northern or Akkadian half should show greater affinities with Arabian or Mesopotamian people. So they're trying to explain the differences of the way people look in Iran or Arabia. But it's such a long time ago. I'm sure that's changed quite a bit. Let's see. The northern half of the Akkadian half should show greater affinities. So they're saying they should look very similar. And Mesopotamian people would seem to be inevitable and is generally admitted. So they're saying they do look kind of similar. It is, however, unnecessary, in view of geographical antecedents, to attribute all such northerly or westerly affinities to the earliest Semitic migration, of which there is historic record. The same factors had been cooperating already for a long time. All right, so now we move on to part 6, which is the Ice Age in the Near East. We have next to see how this region of the two rivers and the sections of the highland zone adjacent to it, northwards and eastwards, were affected by the glacial crisis. As evidence is at present scanty, conclusions must be more general, and a wider survey will best bring out the most essential points. All right. That's not too confusing, but I have to read it again. Let me just read it again. We have next to see how this region of the two rivers and the sections of the highland zone northwards and eastwards were affected. So now they're going to take a look at how this glacial crisis affected this area. As evidence is at best present scanty. And they don't have a lot of evidence for what happened, so it's guesswork. Conclusions must be more general. They can't say very much about it. And a wider survey will best bring out the most essential points. So they'll just try to figure out the main points, the main ideas of this, since there isn't a lot of information regarding this. As far as the head of the Adriatic single series of events that has been reconstructed in greater detail for all Western Europe, and to this we shall return later. East of the Adriatic, information is less copious, so there isn't a lot of information east of the Adriatic about this period. But the main course of events is fairly clear. The Carpathians, Dinaric regions, and the Thracian mass of Rhodope were heavily snow-capped and glaciated locally, and similar conditions prevailed on the coast ranges of Asia Minor, both north and south. Caucasus, Caucasus and Armenia, rising to greater altitudes, were glaciated more severely, and Lebanon, flanked by the Mediterranean on the one side, and with the shores of the Mesopotamian Gulf, not far off as now on the other, had an ice cap exceptionally heavy for its latitude. But a large part of Asia Minor probably remained fertile and habitable throughout. What is far more characteristic of this region, as of the Aegean Depression and Hellenic promontory, is the severely pluvial denudation and accentuating the rugged highlands and smothering the foothills and vast sheets of gravel and sand. Let me read that again. What is far more characteristic of this region, as of the Aegean Depression and the Hellenic promontory, is the severely pluvial denudation. They use such fancy words here. Pluvial, so like rain, flood, denudation, like that maybe it rained so hard or there was so much water that it stripped the vegetation, like the grass and the trees. It was hard for those things to grow because of all of the rain. Accentuating the rugged highlands and smothering the foothills in vast sheets of gravel and sand. So the rain, or all the water, pushed all the gravel down the mountainsides and smothered maybe the places where vegetation would have been able to grow or was growing. In these rivers, cut fresh gorges during the drier intervals, which were also periods of emergence and consequently of longer and steeper gradients, the older drainage of Asia Minor had been longitudinal. Towards the Aegean, I'm just trying to remember what longitude is. I forget if it's like horizontal or if it's, I think it's north and south longitudinal. Now I have to check. Let's see, but I'm sure that's what it is because I remember looking at longitude. I forget which one is longitude and latitude. Longitude measures distance east or west. Wait a minute. Lines of longitude, also called meridians, are imaginary lines. They run north to south. Yeah. So longitudinal lines run north to south of the poles. Well, how did they use it here? The old drainage system of Asia Minor had been longitudinal. So the drainage system of the water ran like north to south or south to north. And the older drainage towards the Aegean subsidence, sections of it are recognizable in the headwaters of the Euphrates, Halys, and Iris. And the great westward avenue past Aphium Karahisar probably represent its main outlet seaward. But later, upthrusts of the west end of the Tauric arc closed this outlet and converted the central plain into a lakeland where some salt and gypsum were deposited, as in Iran. But this had all happened in pre-glacial times, and the subsequent development of Asia Minor was different, for it was an immediate result of the subsidences already mentioned in the Black Sea region. To accelerate erosion in the torrents on the new north coast, and two of these, Sangarius and Halys, cutting back clean through the Paphlagonian range, drained the greater part of the central lakeland and kept all its floor fresh and habitable, except for the small central basin of Lake Tata. The present route is recent and in part remediable even in the 5th century BC. The district of west of Halys was the richest in sheep and corn of all known lands for Herodotus. Lake Tata. Where is that? I guess it probably doesn't exist anymore from the way they're talking about it. But let's see where it was. Again, they're showing Turkey. All of this seems to be around Turkey somewhere. Do they show Lake Tata? I mean, they show these small maps, but I don't know exactly where that's supposed to be. They don't show it in relation to something that we could recognize maybe in the modern world. I guess it's probably somewhere in Turkey, though. Well, let me see. Let me ask ChatGPT. Where is Lake Tata? There isn't a widely recognized Lake Tata, however, is a well-known lake, and there is a well-known lake in Turkey called Lake Tuz. It's possible there could be a local or regional reference to a lake called Tata. Well, maybe they've changed the name, but it doesn't look like they even use that word anymore. The present drought is recent and in part remediable. Even in the 5th century BC, the district west of the Halys, let's see, what about Halys region? That will at least tell us where it should be. Yeah, it's a place in Turkey. Let's just leave it at that. It's a place in Turkey. Was richest in sheep and corn of all known lands for Herodotus. Further east, the Armenian ice cap extended at times almost to the plateau, east and west, but in milder intervals there was continuous highland country, full of small plateau, glacier-fed gorges, and lake basins from eastern Asia Minor to western Iran. Probably even at the worst, some sort of corridor by way of Sivas, Karput, Diyarbakir, and Upper Tigris, while the triangular uplands of North Syria between Adana, Damascus, and Mosul do not seem to have been glaciated at all. Even now, though, the water surface of the Persian Gulf has been greatly restricted. The deflection of the 30-inch rain line northeastward beyond the Lebanon reveals an exceptionally moist and equable climate and associates this margin of the Arabian slab with the highlands to the north and with the Mediterranean seaboard rather than with the rest of Arabia. It is no wonder that we have record of elephants in one of these Syrian valleys as late as the 12th century BC. So there were elephants or records of elephants in these areas 3,000 years ago. Or that so that's Turkey, that they had elephants. That's kind of interesting. And not too long ago, 3,000 years, relatively speaking. Or that the Macedonian veterans of Alexander the Great made here the most enduring settlements. But the well-marked ridge, which is followed by the caravan route from Damascus to Palmyra, makes the transition from parkland to steppe rather abrupt, and as long as Lebanon retained any considerable ice cap, and it was certainly glaciated severely, there was little or no communication between North Syria and South. The spread of highland man into Palestine was probably quite post-glacial. The course of events further east has been less easy to discover. Through the extension of an Indian Ocean along its southern margin, and through the re-establishment of Sarmatian Sea on the north, the climate of Iran necessarily became moister and more equable than it had been while its salt and gypsum beds were accumulating, allowing always for its more southerly latitude and ampler size. We may compare its geographical position with that of Asia Minor now, between the Levant and the Black Sea, and as it retains many elements of its old Indo-African fauna, Remember, fauna means animals. There cannot have been any such climatic break as occurred further west. At most, the salt and gypsum covered waste in its center has been larger or smaller, and more or less occupied by lakes, and its present drought is consequent on the quite recent shrinkage of the Sarmatian Sea. During the glacial crisis, its high marginal ranges were snow-laden, but not severely glaciated except in the northwest and northeast. The diluvial thaw was consequently not very destructive. So I just want to know what the word diluvial means. It's a period associated with associated with a flood, like deluge. Okay, that's a way to remember it. Deluge is diluvial. So the flood period. Where did we see that? The diluvial thaw. So the thawing of the glacier has caused a flood, I guess is what that means. Was consequently not very destructive, and that didn't cause very big problems. And as the main basin was never tapped by inward cutting torrents like Asia Minor, though some intermont basins in Zagros have begun to be drained by streams flowing south into the Persian Gulf. Its local reserve of moisture was only slowly dissipated at the cost, however, of greater ultimate salinity. So that means it became very salty. That saline, that comes from that's same root as salt. So local reserve of moisture was only slowly dissipated, and the cost, however, of greater ultimate salinity. At the cost, however, of greater. So the local reserve of moisture. So as it became drier, it also became saltier. I think that's what they're saying here. East and west of it, however, the ice caps of the Hindu Kush and Armenia, where the marginal ranges converge, isolated this region no less completely than did the seas to north and to south. For until the diluvial debris became continuous along the western frontage, so debris, that means garbage. I think they're talking about stones and rocks and things like that. Became continuous along the western frontage. The Persian Gulf extended, as we've seen, at least to the point where the Tigris emerges from the foothills of Kurdistan, while raised beaches of it have been traced far west. Have been traced far west of the Euphrates. Sorry, I lost my place for a minute. All these regions, therefore, were habitable during the greater part of the Ice Age. And there are Chilean implements on the surface. So that's like very primitive tools that almost look like stones, Chilean implements. Chilean implements on the surface in Iran and Arabia and in gravels containing mammoth bones on the Caspian shore, to show that they were inhabited widely by man. The diluvial thaw, however, brought disaster here, and was natural so far south. It was very rapid, as was natural so far south. It was very rapid. Once the cold crisis was over, violent torrents seemed deeply the superficial sediments of the Arabian slab. So violent storms caused lines. And spread masses of debris, among which the older rivers followed uncertain courses, like the Oxus, later on the Sarmatian seafloor. Then to diluvial rain succeeded drought and drifting sand, before any grassland, still less any forest regime, could be established, sufficient to disintegrate this debris and accumulate soil. in the foothills of Zagros. Similar torrents descending more abruptly spent their diluvial energies within a narrower radius, so that the eventual course of the Tigris skirts and even erodes their fan-shaped screes of gravel. We learned that word scree in an earlier video, but I forgot what it meant, so I'm going to look it up again. Scree, S-R-E-E. Scree refers to a mass of wasting or rock debris found on the slopes of mountains. All right, so now I remember what that means, but let's just take a look at a picture of scree in case you didn't see it last time. Scree. So here's a picture of scree. This is what scree looks like. So it's just like little rocks and gravel left by water, like deposits of rocks and gravel left by water. Okay, where do they use that word scree? Rapidly at first and afterwards more gradually, the northern part of the old Persian Gulf was filled up by these converging deltas, while further south, finer sediment accumulated with proportionate speed. So, rapidly at first and afterwards more gradually, the northern part of the old Persian Gulf was filled up by these converging deltas. So these bodies of waters came together in the Persian Gulf, and there was an upward movement too after long subsidence, for it hit the Euphrates has cut down an older shoreline, and its rapids are now wearing through the sill of this. For it hit the Euphrates cut down to an older shoreline. I'm not sure what they mean by that. The Euphrates has cut down to an older shoreline, and its rapids are now wearing through the sill of this. So the rapids that are there now are caused by this or evidence of this, something like that. Mesopotamia as a focus of post-glacial culture, and to postpone effective occupation till an alluvial area had been created beyond it. This contrast in every respect with Egypt on the one hand and with the Po Valley on the other is complete and of historical importance. All right, so now we have early man in Europe, the Ice Age in Europe. We return now to peninsular Europe, west of the Adriatic and Black Sea. Here the fourfold alpine maxima of the glacial period correspond, as we've seen, with the pluvial maxima of the Nile. They keep using this word maxima. I'm not sure what it means, but I'm just going to look up alpine maxima. Alpine maxima. I'm sure it's like a technical term for some period or event. Maybe it's just something that they used to say, but they don't anymore. I asked ChatGPT what alpine maxima is, and it says, I don't know. What happens if I Google it? Alpine maxima. It doesn't come up with anything. So what about the other term? What was it? Pluvial maxima? Let me find it. I've got too many windows open and I'm getting confused. All right, let's close this. What was the other word? We had alpine maxima, glacial period correspond, pluvial maxima. Okay, let's see if pluvial maxima has a definition. Pluvial maxima refers to periods of time characterized by unusually high amounts of precipitation or rainfall. So maybe it's like a meteorological term, a weather term. The term pluvial is derived from the Latin word pluvia, which means rain. In the context of climatology and hydrology, a pluvial period is marked by increased rainfall and wetter conditions. Pluvial maxima can have significant impacts on local ecosystems. Well, so that makes sense. If there's a period of climate change where there's a lot of rain or water, you could call that a pluvial maxima. But what does it mean if you call something an alpine maxima, which, refers to mountains? I guess maybe since they're talking about glaciers and mountain creation, maybe this was a time, I'm just guessing because I can't find any information on the internet about it, but maybe they're using that to refer to a time when a lot of mountains were created because of glaciers. Maybe they'll explain it. Let's see. We return now to peninsular Europe, west of the Adriatic and Black Sea. Here, the fourfold alpine maxima of the glacial period correspond, as we've seen, with the pluvial maxima of the Nile, and with repeated glaciation fringed by diluvial rainfall of the Balkan lands and Western Asia. So maybe they're either talking about the creation of glaciers, the growing of glaciers, or the creation of mountains because of the glaciers. Something like that. Earlier study of the river gravels and caves of the Atlantic seaboard from Britain to Spain, and most of all in northern and central France, has recently been supplemented by research along the north side of the Pyrenees, and in many parts of Spain among the caves of central German and Bohemian highlands. In the widespread deposits of interglacial loess, that was a word that we saw last time too, loess, but I can't remember what it means. So I'm going to look it up again. Loess is a type of sedimentary deposit composed of fine-grained, loosely compacted silt and clay-sized particles, often with varying amounts of sand or other minerals. The term loess is of German origin, and it is commonly used in English to describe these deposits. Well, let's look at a picture. Let's find a... I think we did this last time, but I don't even remember, so it doesn't hurt to do it again. Oh yeah, I remember this because it looks yellow. I'll show you a picture of loess. So it's type minerals and sand and things like that, and it has a yellow look to it. This says Loess Plateau. It's kind of like sand almost. There must be a difference though. Maybe it's harder like stone or chalk or something like that. Widespread deposits of interglacial loess along the Rhine and the Danube Valley, along the margins of the North German lowland, and beyond the Carpathians in Poland and Ukraine. There is controversy still as to the perspective of the earlier human finds, the principal question being whether these are later than the third or Riss glaciation, or go back into the milder interval between this and the second or Mindel crisis, which was the severest and most extensive of all. In what follows, the longer intervals are adopted, in the belief that these accord more closely with the pluvial series on the Nile. In Europe, as in Egypt, Eolithic objects, that means things made from stone, if I remember correctly, Eolithic objects. Well, we might as well look that up again. I think that's what it means, though. Eolithic objects, like tools and things made from stone. Eolithic meaning. Hypothetical early stage of the Stone Age, preceding the Paleolithic period. Eolithic is characterized by very primitive stone tools. and is considered by some scholars to represent an initial or transitional phase of human technology. Let's take a look at Eolithic tools. Let's see. Eolithic tools. And the kind of pictures we get. They almost don't look like tools at all. Let me put this up here. See. How could you even tell if you saw that it was a tool? Just looks like a stone formation. They use that other word, Chilean, which I guess refers to something very similar. Maybe there's a difference, though. Okay, so in Europe, as in Egypt, Eolithic objects from pre-glacial deposits have been claimed by some observers as human handiwork. So as you saw the picture, it's kind of hard to tell. Is that a tool or just a stone that looks like a tool? It's not really easy to know. So in the light of the Egyptian material, which offers very similar forms, the probability that they are so is somewhat increased. So they might really be tools. But it is too early yet for an accepted verdict on most of them. In East Anglia, however, the presence of pre-glacial man seems already secure. On the longer reckoning of the above adopted, it is in the first interglacial deposits which preceded the boulder clays and moraines of the Mindel glaciation that the earliest human fragment has been found. A lower jaw, chinless but recognizably human, from a gravel bed near Heidelberg. No implements have been discovered in this deposit. A more perfect skull of a quite different and more modern-looking type comes together with eoliths and rolled bones of subtropical animals from a very early riverside deposit in Piltdown, near Lewes, above, though not actually with, which lay gravel with implements ruder than those next to the mentioned, but generally similar in type. The date of the Piltdown deposit is still disputed, but it cannot be later than the earlier glacial period gravels of the Thames, and may be considerably earlier. But I remember like 20-something years ago in anthropology class talking about the Piltdown man and that it was a hoax. So this must have been written before that was discovered, because they're using it as an example of a very early human in England. Next, in the second interglacial debris of the thaw-swollen Somme, in other West European rivers, occurs numerous implements of the ruder fashion typical of the gravels of Shell, and then in more skillful workmanship at Saint-Achille, both styles are chipped from natural nodules of flint, so as to leave one end pointed and the butt naturally or designedly rounded for grasping in the hand. These are but flood spoil from camping grounds on the river banks, and tell little about their makers and users except that they haunted the drinking places of the large African fauna, whose bones are in the same gravels. Here, though, we have their implements. We have at present no trace of the men themselves. So they found tools that are pretty clearly tools as far as they can see, but no actual evidence of people, no bones, no remains of people. It is only when the third glaciation draws on and the African fauna were being replaced, except the woolly mammoth, by reindeer, musk ox, Arctic fox, marmot, and other Arctic animals, that man and his prey alike took shelter from the weather in natural caves, and the Mousterian scrapers and borers, rudely fashioned by retouching the fresh edges of the flakes, formed in shaping the Acheulean coup de poing. Give a glimpse of the scraping and piercing of bones and hides during such a sojourn. I think we looked up that French term last time, coup de poing, but I forgot what it means. So I'm going to look it up again. Coup de poing. What does it mean? Meaning. Oh. You know, Google has really become useless. I'm going to ask ChatGPT. It will give me an answer when Google won't. Coup de poing is a French term that translates to punch or blow in English. It is used to describe a physical strike delivered with a closed fist, typically in the context of combat or fighting. The term is also associated with martial arts. Oh, I better ask in terms, let's see, coup de poing archaeology. In the context of archaeology, coup de poing is sometimes used to refer to a type of stone tool. The term translates from the French to punch or to blow, the method of manufacture for a particular type of tool. So it's like a hand axe that's made by striking the rock to form it. Okay. Maybe I'll remember next time they use it. If they use it again, maybe I could remember that. Give a glimpse of these. So Acheulean coup de poing, give a glimpse of the scraping and piercing of bones and hides during such sojourn. The first hint of woman's knack of finding secondary uses for the waste from man's chase and chipping. So these earlier tools that they find, even though they don't find people, they find these very primitive tools and the garbage, the leftovers, the bones, or the tools that they used for scraping, piercing bones and scraping hides, scraping the skins of animals. And the first hint of woman's knack of finding secondary uses for the waste from man's chase and chipping. So somehow they're making a connection between whatever was left over from hunting and thinking that women use these tools for other purposes, but I don't see what they meant, how they, or what purposes, they don't say. The colder climate was enforcing the invention of clothes. In a Jersey cave of this period, the hunting weapons predominated near the opening, domestic scrapers and hacked bones of animals further in. And remains of a child lay little outside the entrance. In one French cave, an old man had been buried intentionally in the floor, crouched as so many savages sleep. This phase, as has a wide distribution from the south of England to Spain and Portugal, Algeria and Tunis, the plateau edge of the Nile Valley, and the Syrian margin of Arabia eastward too, through mid-Europe as far as Hungary and South Russia and the Caucasus, and the style of the new implements is still very uniform. But outside these limits, Mousterian settlements have not been found as yet, whereas Acheulean and Chilean implements are common in South Africa and even further afield. So the very primitive tools you can find everywhere as far as South Africa. And what other place did they mention? Oh, I thought they mentioned another place. But the Mousterian tools seem to be unique to Europe or France, this area. No, sorry, throughout Europe and North Africa. Okay, and it is possible that it is to this period that we should assign a great divergence between human experiences within and beyond this Mousterian area for reasons to be stated later. Oh, let me read that again. And it is possible that it is to this period that we should assign a great divergence between human experiences within and beyond this Mousterian area for reasons stated later. So they're saying there's something very significant about this period because suddenly there's this big difference between the type of things that you might find in Africa, southern Africa, South Africa, and this area around the Mediterranean. Like their implements, the men of this older Paleolithic age are of very uniform type, and as this Neanderthal type differs markedly from all subsequent varieties of men, and also from the older but more modern-looking type they represented by the Piltdown skull. I just want to see when that was proven to be a hoax, because I keep forgetting to check the published date of this book. Let's see, Piltdown Man. When did they discover that it wasn't real? Claimed that he had discovered the missing link between early apes and man in February of 1912. So that hoax or discovery was 1912, but then when did they decide it wasn't? Began a systematic search of the spoil heaps. 1915. Oh, 1938. Oh wait, no. Scientific investigation, 1953. 1950. So this book was written somewhere between 1913 and 1953, I guess. But I think it's around maybe 1915 to 1920 when this was written. Okay. I'll check one of these days. Like their implements, the men of this older Paleolithic age are of a very uniform type. And this Neanderthal type differs markedly from all subsequent varieties of men, also from the older but more modern-looking type represented by the Piltdown skull, which is a hoax, apparently, and some other finds of various early periods. It must be noted briefly at this point, in the difficult question of its place in human genealogy, that this is not the place to go. It's... Wait, what are they? Let me read that again. Into the difficult question of its place in human genealogy, this is not the place to go. What is not the place to go? I have to read this again. This is like my third time reading it, but there's something about this. Wait. Like their implements, the men of this older Paleolithic age are very uniform. So the older Paleolithic human seemed very... There wasn't much difference from region to region. They all seem the same. But this Neanderthal type differs markedly from all subsequent varieties of men, and also from the older but more modern-looking type represented by the Piltdown skull, and some other finds of various periods. It must be noted briefly at this point into the difficult question of its place in human genealogy. This is not the place to go. Its distribution also is so imperfectly made that its immediate origin is a little clearer. Into the difficult question of its place in the human genealogy, this is not the place to go. Its distribution also is so imperfectly made out that its immediate origin is little clearer. From its occurrence, however, at Krapina, between the Hungarian plain and the head of the Adriatic, as well as around the western margin of the Alpine core of Western Europe, has been thought that it may represent a type of indigenous to the highland zone. So they're trying to explain this different type. I mean, regardless of the Piltdown hoax, it seems like they're trying to explain where does this different type of humanoid come from. That's what it seems like to me. It has been thought that it may represent a type of indigenous to the highland zone and alien to the more modern-looking men of the western and southwestern plains. The Mousterian culture, however, with which this human type has been commonly thought to be associated, has a much wider range. But if this association is to be sustained, it must be by discoveries of Neanderthal bones considerably further afield than hitherto. The Mousterian cave settlements, with their first hints that the growing austerity of the third glacial crisis was enforcing the use of hides and furs, of new types of implements to improve them into clothing, and of new processes to fashion these implements, have no such wide distribution as the Chilean or Acheulean hunting tools. So this different type of humanoid was not very common. And you can see evidence of this culture in the refinement of tools because they had to suddenly create clothes to stay warm. It may be inferred that outside the region affected by the third crisis, and in the absence of this rude stimulus to invention, the Mousterian stage was not reached, still less surpassed. So other people didn't have to deal with these difficult climates, and they never tried. They never tried to refine tools or make more complicated clothing. In another direction, however, the ancestors of the Solutrean implement makers, who must be dealt with later, seem to have preserved and greatly developed a knack for flint flaking, very closely resembling the best Acheulean work. And the discontinuity I've been talking for too long. Discontinuity between Mousterian and subsequent settlements suggests that even with this austerer region, Mousterian ingenuity, such as it was, failed literally to weather the storm. So they were good, but they weren't good enough, and eventually they disappeared, except locally on the far Saharan fringe. Its suppression, however, had another and a different cause, for the next occupants of the Mousterian area itself are of a different build and breed. For these new varieties, for they differ appreciably among themselves, the older names of Cro-Magnon race and race of Logerie, so called from the typical caves in the Dordogne district of France, have been generally superseded by that of the cave of the Aurignac, or Upper Garonne, where the material of its earlier date and better authenticated. Though their actual build is now best illustrated by the complete skeleton discovered in 1909 at Combe-Capelle, another Dordogne cave, the Aurignacien men were of small stature, 5 feet 6 inches, and much slighter built than the Neanderthal man, with the long and narrow, but loftier and more capacious skull, very prominent behind and slightly gable-shaped above. The forehead is higher, but still recedes, and the brow ridges are still rather prominent. So what is this called? This is called the Aurignacian, or let me see if I can find a picture of an Aurignacian man. Aurignacian man. Do they have any artist renditions? Here's an Aurignacian. Oh. Wait, let's compare that to a Neanderthal. Wait, here's another one. Well, from what I remember what a Neanderthal looks like, I think the Orinacean is more attractive. Let's see. Yeah, because a Neanderthal is kind of ugly. Okay, let's see. Let's go back. They had a short, broad face, less massive jaw than the Neanderthaler, and definitely human chin, well represented by examples from Britain, France, and as far east as Predmost in Moravia. This is a type in which not only there are no salient features which cannot be matched among the living races of the present day. No, let me read that again. This is a type in which not only there are no salient features which cannot be matched among the living races of the present day. So that's very confusingly said or written, but I think what they're saying is that nothing stands out to make them look extremely different from modern people. That's how I'm interpreting it. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think? Okay, let's see. But it remains the predominant element among the modern inhabitants of secluded districts such as Plynlimmon moorland in central Wales. It is common still in the west of Ireland, in the Dordogne in Sardinia, and about Guipuzcoa in Spain, and in these parts of Tra os Montes, and has been noted in the oases south of Algeria and Tunis, and among the Egyptians, Somalis, and elsewhere in northeastern Africa. Yeah, so they're saying this looks like certain groups of modern humans. The numerous earlier allusions to Neanderthaloid individuals in modern European populations probably refer to these Orinaceans who look primitive enough when contrasted with the majority of modern men, but are separated by almost as great an interval from the real Neanderthal type. From the characteristics of these survivors, it is possible to supplement the evidence of the early skeletons. The forehead is narrow with marked hollows in the temples. Above the heavy eyebrows, the orbits are long and narrow. The cheeks are high and broad. The nose is broad. The jaw prominent. The chin rather weak. The stature is low. The carriage loose and ungainly. The arms very long. The hairy eyes. The hair, eyes, the hairy eyes. The hair, eyes, and complexion are dark. The whole body is very hairy. In some individuals, the resemblance to a common type of Aboriginal Australian is well marked, and the similarity between Orinacean skulls in Europe and prehistoric skulls in Lagoa Santa in Brazil and other remote localities round the margins of South America suggests that this type had once almost as wide a distribution as that of older types of implements. It does not, however, seem to have been recorded as those have been from tropical or southern Africa, and its extreme hairiness and the wavy texture of individual hairs distinguishes it altogether both from Negroid and Mongoloid breed. So they're saying that this type of human, which I think they're saying is similar to Aborigines in Australia and even some early humans in Brazil, is different from Asian types of humans and African types of humans, or humanoids. I guess we should say humanoids, because I don't know if these are really considered humans yet. But they're already suggesting there's a big difference between the type of humanoid you would find in Asia, Africa, Europe, etc. Okay, let's see. With the occupation of Western Europe, therefore, by Aurignacian man begins a continuous series of events and material remains running on to modern times. There are moments in this series where continuity of civilization cannot be directly traced, but continuous descent is sure, and therewith continuity of tradition, which above all other human characters engages the attention of historians. Other breeds of man have intruded later, as we shall see, from the southeast along the mountain zone, and from northeast as the Siberian forests extended towards the Volga basin. But in Western Europe, Aurignacian man has never been wholly superseded and still forms coherent groups. Now they're showing a map, but this is sideways. Let me flip it around. Let's see. What are they showing us? Oh, that's completely upside down. So we have this Ice Age map. Let me zoom out. Whoops. So we've got the edge of the ice sheets, land over 3,000 feet, probable water area, lowest, and 200-meter line below present sea level. So let's see. The edge of ice sheets. It's hard to see. So the ice sheets covered most of Scandinavia and Northern Europe, it seems. And then we have the land over 3,000 meters, which is that. So that looks like Central Europe, like southern Germany or Czech area or Slovenia. No, it's more like this is more like Bulgaria or something like that. Romania. And probable water areas. Oh no, those are water areas around Bulgaria. Where's the land over 3,000 feet? Southern France has it. Not much. Where else? Spain, parts of Spain where almost where the Pyrenees are. Then you have the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. Probable water areas. So probable water areas, Slovenia, Bulgaria, Romania, around there, and then it seems like parts of Russia or Ukraine. Okay, well that's enough of the map. Plinlimmon moorlanders and the secluded settlements already mentioned in Spain, Portugal, and Algeria. We are confronted, however, at this stage with the new turning point of advancement, the participation of more than one distinct breed of man in a single tradition of culture and in exploitation of the same region. For side by side with the Aurignacian type, at least two other varieties of man made their appearance in Western Europe during the warmer and drier period now in question. One of these, represented by the Cro-Magnon skeletons, is both less widely distributed and of larger and more modern-looking build, and has left, like the Aurignacian, its descendants among the modern population of France, Spain, and North Africa, and also, according to some observers, round the western Baltic. Its general similarity with the Aurignacian has led to the presumption that it spread likewise from the southwest. So we have let's just take a look at the Aurignacian man again. Well, the way that they describe him sounds pretty ugly, but I don't think that That's pretty ugly. I think that's okay. That's the Aurignacian man. Now let's take a look at the Cro-Magnon man and see what they said. They're kind of similar. So let's take a look. It's funny because I can look at these faces and I can recognize people I know who look like these, both types. But I know people who look like that. Okay, well, let's keep going. The other type, distinctly Negroid, is best represented by the skeletons from the Grimaldi cave near Mentone. There can be little doubt of its African affinities, and there are two other indications of such African types in Europe. A pygmy breed of somewhat Negroid appearance from an ill-dated deposit at Schaffhausen near Constance, and a well-marked Steatophagy. I think we had that last time, that word, but I don't remember what it means, so I'm going to look it up again. Steatophagy. Doesn't it? I think it means like a short person, and I kind of remember that because of the piggy. It reminds me of pygmy. But let's see, Steatophagy. I guess I spelled it wrong. Isn't a widely recognized term. It's possible that the term may be Steatophagy. Wait, maybe I spelled it wrong. Where is it? I wish I could copy and paste on this PDF. It would be so much easier. Let's see. Pygmy, Schaffhausen, Steatophagy. Didn't I? Oh, okay. Steatophagy. Meaning. Physical characteristic. Oh! I remember what it means now. It means big butt. This is what it means, because so steatophagy refers to a particular physical characteristic characterized by an accumulation of excess fat in the buttocks, especially the upper part of the buttocks. The term is often used in anthropological and archaeological contexts to describe a specific type of body morphology, and has been historically associated with certain populations in Africa. Women with steatophagy typically have a pronounced or protruding buttocks. Okay, so that's what it means. It means big butt. All right, let's see. A pygmy breed of somewhat Negroid appearance from an ill-dated deposit at Schaffhausen near Constance, and the well-marked steatophagy, so the big butts, which characterized Negroid Bushmen and Hottentots of South Africa, and of some other Negro breeds further north, and is represented in European drawings and sculptures of the female figure from Aurignacian times to the Neolithic art of Malta. Steatophagy, however, I lost my place. Steatophagy, however, is not an exclusively Negroid character, and as it has been observed among the living in the same secluded districts along the Western Pyrenees as the Aurignacian individuals already mentioned, all that results from the Grimaldi and Schaffhausen finds is that African varieties either had not yet entirely disappeared from southern Europe, or occasionally returned thither during periods of exceptional warmth. In general, however, it may be assumed that the present climatic zones were henceforward fairly well established, and that the Negro man in mass in the mass, did not range north of the Sahara Desert, nor except sporadically, as now, along the Atlantic seaboard of North Africa. The mode of life of the Aurignacian man differed no less than his build from that of the Mousterians, whom he superseded, and there is no reason for an archaeologist to dispute the consensus of anthropologists that there is no trace of intercourse between the two types. If they met, it was as independent competitors for the means of subsistence, and the almost total disappearance of Mousterian man after the arrival of the Aurignacian suggests that it was a war to the knife between them. The Tasmanians had no better fortune after the arrival of Europeans in their country, and while the Tasmanians were rather less brutish than the Mousterians, European culture claims some advance over Aurignacian. Aurignacian industry shows great superiority over Mousterian. Flint implements are fashioned no longer from cores, but from selected flakes, and are trimmed by careful flaking on both surfaces, not on one only as heretofore. There are special types for boring and graving, knives adapted for a drawing cut, and chisels for push scraping. And the uses of all these are illustrated by an increasing quantity of bone tools, some of them shaped to be hafted with wood. There are bone dress pins, beads and pendants, and bone whistles suggest concerted signals for action at a distance. We may infer that women took some pains with their attire. So how do you say that? The Aurignacian people were more advanced. They made better tools, and they even made nicer decorations and things for women to wear to make them look prettier. Okay, let's see. So more noteworthy still is the beginning of the pictorial art, engravings on bones, and eventually carvings in relief in the rounder, larger drawings and paintings on the walls of caves. The subjects are the animals most hunted by man. I wonder if those are the famous French cave drawings. Let me see. If I type Aurignacian paintings, let's see what I wonder if they give those famous, yeah, those are those famous cave paintings that you find in France. They're beautiful, actually. So they're pretty good artists. Human figures are rarer, usually representing women with rather prominent jaw, long braided hair, and frequent steatophagy, so big butts. Let's see, Aurignacian paintings, human. Let's see if we can find a picture. Do they show? Well, I guess they show these, but these don't look like women. Maybe, oh, I don't know. Maybe they're women hunters, but so they have these like hunting pictures. I don't see any steatophagy. I'm a little disappointed. I was hoping for some steatophagy. Wait. Oh, I guess you might consider that steatophagus a little bit. Okay. Let's see. Both men and women are shown very hairy and are seldom clothed, except when they masquerade in complete hides of animals. A late and perplexing class of linear designs may represent huts or other construction of timber. I didn't see any pictures with clothes or costumes or anything like that. This civilization extends in time from the beginning of the interglacial period already mentioned until far on into the last recurrence of glacial, or rather pluvial, conditions for the fourth Vulum. Glaciation was a comparatively small affair. It passes through several phases, Aurignacian in the special sense, Magdalenian, a well-marked regional culture of the Atlantic coast plain, best illustrated in the Dordogne cave of La Madeleine. Let's see, is that a painting? Let's see. La Madeleine painting. Or cave. Let's say cave. Oh, well, they have these carvings, which are kind of nice and interesting. La Madeleine, a rock shelter in the Dordogne with exquisite art. Do they show anything else? They have this. Looks like a bowl or something. Here's a painting. Huh, okay. Magdalenian art and the industry much degenerated. Oh, wait. Best illustrated in the Dordogne cave of La Madeleine, which belongs to the beginning of the late spell of austerity and Azilian. First identified in a remarkable cave in the foothills of the Pyrenees, which shows Magdalenian art and industry much degenerated and only retrieved in interest by its use of painted symbols to distinguish hoarded pebbles of uncertain use. It is the first advance from delineation of objects to the visual representation of ideas. On some sites in France between Aurignacian and Magdalenian deposits, which in general form a continuous series of development, occur fresh and very characteristic types of implements, best represented in Solutré, near Mâcon, where hearths and burials of their makers lie immediately over a vast deposit of horse bones, marking the climax of the dry steppe regime, and probably some kind of late Aurignacian slaughter ground. Their graceful laurel leaf and willow leaf blades, single-edged knives, and one-shouldered points suitable for missiles economize labor by skill in the choice and manipulation of material, and might be mistaken for a high-quality Neolithic work. This use of missile weapons is itself a new invention, appropriate to the hunters of so swift an animal as the horse. Ivory beads, in country now devoid of elephants, suggest either wide range of movement or some form of exchange. So they're finding ivory beads where there are no longer elephants, which means that maybe they were trading with people, or that they traveled very far distances. Sketches of animals on pebble and bone, and hordes of yellow, red, and brown coloring matter indicate artistic tastes. Insignia and whistles imply organized action against swift, intelligent game. It has even been suggested that Solutrian horses were tame, but no horse spits have been found, nor proof of any special breeding. This Solutrian episode is noteworthy because here for the first time we have intrusion of one culture abruptly and temporarily into the region where another was in process of development. And as this intrusion occurs, at the climax of a cycle of dry continental climate, when conditions were most uniform and the obstacles of forest, river, and morass were minimized, it has been commonly interpreted as due to this intrusion of fresh people of tall, heavy-built, long-headed stock represented by individuals from Brünn and Predmost in Moravia, whence these people and their culture originated, is not yet clear, as no human remains can be identified as theirs. Their flint technique, as has been already noted, suggests that they inherited a Schulian tradition, and it is possible that this tradition survived somewhere further east, while Central Europe and parts of the West were passing through the Mousterian decadence and receiving Aurignacian culture from the southwest. So they're speculating that there was some kind of invasion of other people. They don't have any evidence of these people, no remains. But I guess they see evidence of these tools that they were using. So severely continental a climate in Western Europe suggests austere drought further inland and accords with the deep accumulations of loess over the greater part of the northern flatland during late Paleolithic times. It was certainly a good country to leave. The lack of Solutrean remains south of the Pyrenees, except one isolated find in Altamira, and their comparatively frequent occurrence in Lower Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, and eastern Poland almost preclude the alternative of a southern origin was formerly thought possible, and the striking resemblance of certain Nile Valley implements, such has been adduced in favor of this, must be taken in connection with the similar workmanship of the earliest implements of Neolithic Susa, which will be discussed on page 85. So they think that these people came from the south. And the reason they think that is because the tools or the workmanship that they exhibited resembled things that you might find in Egypt. And would be explicable by just such an exodus southward. Or that these people traveled south. Wait a minute, I'm confused. Let's see. From the northeastern steppe, as has brought nomad raiders more than once from Turkestan to Mesopotamia and the borders of Egypt with historic times. We shall see reason to suppose later on that the earliest Neolithic people of South Russian steppe, and probably also of the Danubian region, may be descendants of these Solutrean hunters withdrawn as rapidly as they had come when the Magdalenian climate reforested the western plains and restricted their hunting grounds. Oh, that's a little bit confusing. So we're going from France all the way east to Turkmenistan or Turkestan and the Russian steppes. But they're saying that these people went south, even almost to the border of Egypt at some point, maybe in search of food or prosperity. Another small group of Solutrean remains is notable as the first indication of man's presence in Scandinavia. The southern promontory, of which must therefore have been released at least temporarily from the ice grip, and there seems reason to believe that there may be Solutrean blood in the earliest men of that region, whose remains have been preserved, though their date is very much later. Indeed, at any period when the forest zone was restricted to the foothills of the Carpathians and the central German highlands, there was no physical obstacle to the movements of hunting hordes between the shores of the Black Sea and the Caspian, and those of the Baltic, or the margin of the Scandinavian ice sheet. All right, I'm going to take a 1-minute break, get something to drink, and I will be back. So I'm trying to finish chapter 1 today. I think we will finish it. We're getting close to the end, I hope. It's pretty long. But I'll read for maybe another hour or so. But I'm going to take a 1-minute break. Okay, we're back. So let's keep going with chapter 1. The close of the Old Stone Age. This is part 8. On the other hand, the steadily increasing moisture of the Magdalenian climate restricted the habitable areas. For the forest encroached on the hunting ground. And horde hunting tribes do not easily adapt themselves to forest life. Arts and industries degenerated, especially when the antlers of the reindeer gave place to the less workable tines of the forest-ranging deer. And the material for harpoons and spearheads, the barbed harpoons themselves, betray the growing importance of fishing. As the rivers increased in size, the abundance of miniature flints and tardenois the abundance of miniature flints and tardenois. What is a tardenois, I wonder? Tardenois. Let's see. Tardenois. Oh, I get something that looks very medieval when I type Tardenois. I guess it's just something from that area of France, but I don't know what it is. Okay. And many similar at Tardenois. Yes, it's a place in France. Okay. Suggests that wooden clubs or spears were armed with them, as was later customary, later in the alpine lake dwellings, and indicates that timber was more plentiful. Then, for causes which are still obscure, the distinctive Capsian type of culture, which have already seen to have been best and earliest represented near Gafsa in Tunis, and widely distributed from Tripoli to Morocco, spread northwards through Spain and France, where its local varieties have been commonly known as Campignan, into Belgium. It shows a revived interest in flint work, and some of its forms recall a far older technique, which had certainly lasted long in northwest Sahara. And apparently all across North Africa. This early African style has some resemblance of the Mousterian, and we may compare the relation already suggested between the Acheulean and Solutrean techniques. And many of these Campanian style was of southerly origin. In any case, the Campanian style was of southerly origin, and marks a last Paleolithic attempt to reoccupy the west of Europe, perhaps during some spell of drier weather. But this adventure failed. Like the Solutrean eruption, the Campanian survivors merged in the disorganized remnants who harbored in cave shelters in Spain and in the south of France, in open settlements on the downs along the Marne and Somme, and in Belgium, where there is some reason to believe that at Flenu and Spienne there was also immigration of rude tribes from the northeast, and in fishing and hunting stations along the Atlantic coast, from Portugal to Scotland and Denmark. Here, immense refuse heaps of shells, bones, and implements mark a last stage of collapse of the old hunting folk, like the modern Yegans of Terra del Fuego and the strandloopers of Cape Colony. These kitchen middens represent a long period during which the interior of the continent was, for the most part, forest or swamp. And men hunted or gathered shellfish along the strand, without wandering far, except occasionally seaward for fishing. Only three almost accidental acquisitions betray some overlap between the desperate state of these survivors of the old Stone Age and the New World which was coming into being within the dreaded oak forest. The dog, in this extremity, became man's messmate and fellow hunter. Occasional implements of Neolithic fabric were acquired somehow and refurbished by flaking as if in mere ignorance of their proper handling, and the clay linings of the old leathern cups and bowls accidentally burned at first and thereby hardened in the fire, gave a first notion of pot making, and to be imitated by degrees but without improvement of form. All three discoveries suggest contact, at least occasional, with some other kind of man, to whom forest and swamp were unfamiliar and habitable, and both forest and swamp contain such men as we have now to see. Further north, the swamp engulfing by degrees much that had been tundra and cold steppe north of the central German highlands, had long since been assisted in its dreary advance by considerable subsidence of the whole north of West Europe, so that the period during which the Scandinavian ice sheet shrank finally back and exposed the south promontory of Sweden was now in which the Baltic was an open gulf of an enlarged North Sea that washed the 100-foot terrace of its Scottish coast. The silt set free by the annual thaws varied slightly in quality as the season changed, and the banded clays which it formed in the Baltic Gulf form an uniquely continuous record, so minutely graduated that it has been possible to reckon within a few centuries the interval between then and now. From this vast natural chronometer, it would appear that the coast of Scania was released about 12,000 years ago, and northern Sweden about 5,000 years ago. The release of the North German lowland was, of course, rather earlier, perhaps about 15,000 BC. These inshore Uldea clays, so called, from the chief marine shell which they contain, were later raised above the water so far that the Danish archipelago became dry land, and the Baltic a lake wherein Enceladus and other freshwater shells superseded the marine Uldea. This rise greatly increased the swamp-covered areas and seemed to have permitted the westward spread of a peculiar culture best illustrated by the Meglemos settlement in eastern Denmark. Meglemos. Let's see if there's a picture of that. Meglemos settlement. Did I spell it wrong? Maglemos. Oh, well, there's really nothing to see. It's not much of a picture, but I guess this is what they're talking about. It's some kind of archaeological site. Okay. Illustrated by the Maglemos settlement in eastern Denmark. Afloat or stranded according to the season, a raft was constructed of pine trunks from the coniferous forest fringe which encroached on the swamp margin as it rose and dried. And from this precarious home, men fished and hunted, of a distinct breed which seems to have moved westward from the cold steppe of northern Eurasia. And many have been of ultimately Mongoloid origin. At its greatest extension, this type may have been made touch with the Magdalenian hunters of France. If it be admitted that one of its men had been found with them in the Schonslade cave, but it borrowed little from them, and only in its retreat, when the forest restricted its swampy hunting grounds, did it absorb something of the Magdalenian artistic spirit, perhaps from hunting parties out of the west who had wandered onto the north flank of the forest and remained there. With the Maglemose culture may be connected other swampland settlements round Lake Ladoga and in the coastlands of the East Baltic, and it seems likely that a Mongoloid element among the modern Finns, and probably the main strain of the Lapps, are descendants of these people. What forced the retirement of the Maglemose culture was no less the aggression of the sea than that of the continental forest. The Baltic became open gulf again, rather more so than at present, for it is to this phase that the 50-foot terrace of Scotland belongs. Marine shellfish entered from such as the periwinkle, which gives its name to this Listerina stage. Listerina stage. And following them, the shellfish-eating folk of the kitchen middens. Now they keep saying that kitchen middens. I don't know what that means. Kitchen middens. What is that? Kitchen middens, also known as shell middens or refuse heaps, are so these are it's like the garbage heaps of these groups of people. Sites consisting mainly of accumulated remains of domestic waste, often associated with human settlements. These types are valuable for archaeologists because they provide insights into the daily lives, diets, and activities of past human populations. Kitchen middens. So maybe middens is like scraps or something like that. Okay, where do we see that? So following them, the shellfish-eating folk of the kitchen middens wandered along the North German coast as far as Lettland, where the pine forest closes upon the shore. Hence they persisted long, and the miserable Feni, described by Tacitus in the 1st century A.D., may well be the last remnant of them. Feni, maybe it's Feni, the miserable Feni, described by Tacitus. Okay, the swamp culture of the Northeast, as will be seen from this sequence of events, coexisted with the considerable part of the Paleolithic decadence. At least two minor advances of the snow cap of the Alps can be traced during a long withdrawal of the Scandinavian ice sheet, and the general mitigation of the climate of Western Europe was to this extent delayed and interrupted. It would probably be safe to place the Maglemose culture at about the same period as the spread of the Campignan influences northwards over France. It is certainly older than the kitchen middens, since these crowd closely on the modern coastline, which was submerged in the Maglemese period. So let's see, it's certainly older than the kitchen. What is certainly older? It would probably be safe to place the Maglemese culture at about the same period as the spread of the Campignan influences northward over France, and it's certainly older than the kitchen middens. So whatever evidence they have of the Maglemese culture is older than the remains, the garbage heaps that they found, which follow the modern coastline. So they find these garbage heaps in the same line as the coastline, which is modern, but at the time that they're talking about this other group that was submerged in water. The part played in northwestern Europe by the swamp culture and by those alien men from the northeast who are its representatives was but slight and for a short duration. The continental forest, on the other hand, which had been spreading intermittently across Europe, northward and westward, in the wake of the retreating ice sheet, fringed by birch, hazel, and pine, but itself composed mainly of oak and other deciduous trees, with the zone of beech, walnut, and chestnut following on an average some 500 miles behind the pines, had reached and smothered all country where trees could grow, as far as the Atlantic seaboard, and southern Britain, at least, by a date which may roughly be estimated not far short of 7000 BC, the Paleolithic remnant had retreated before it, till only the kitchen-midden folk survived. On the very strand line, and discontinuously even there, in the interior, a few exceptional moorlands, bleak downs, and larger expanses of thirsty loess in the Rhine and Danube basins and in the North German plain, remained comparatively treeless oases where hunting folk might live. And if this had been all, the old world Stone Age might have passed out of human experience, a withered branch of the tree of life. That this was not so is due essentially to two factors. One is the sequence of climactic belts already noted, which provides that a northward shift of the westerly winds is accompanied by commensurate, though not necessarily equal, shift of the Mediterranean and desert zone climates, and consequently by ampler accommodation for human activities of the Euro-African type. The other is the circumstance, not so generally appreciated, that the forest zone itself is nowhere untenanted by man, and that in favorable circumstances within that zone, other solutions were found for the problem, not merely of maintaining life, but of acquiring reserves of vitality, which permitted aggressive exploitation and engendered a culture appropriate to the forest regime. Ooh, we finished chapter 1 finally. That took about 7 or 8 hours of reading. Just chapter 1. Okay, well, next time we will move on to chapter 2. I'm going to end it here. And we will start chapter 2, Neolithic and Bronze Age cultures. How exciting. Okay, thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.